Sueli Carter's hands trembled as she held the screaming infant against her chest, his tiny face red and tear-soaked. She knew she shouldn't be in the boss's private nursery, knew she was breaking every rule by even touching his son, but the baby's desperate cries had been echoing through the mansion for hours, and no one else seemed to know how to help him. The pediatrician had left 30 minutes ago with another useless prescription. The nanny had quit that morning after 2 sleepless weeks, and the most powerful man in Chicago, a man who controlled empires with a single word, stood helpless in the hallway, his usual composure shattered by his son's suffering. Sueli had lost her own daughter 3 months ago. The grief was still raw, an open wound that bled with every breath, but her body hadn't forgotten. Her breasts were still heavy with milk that had nowhere to go, a cruel reminder of what she'd lost. And now, as she rocked this stranger's child, feeling his desperate hunger, his painful need, something inside her broke and mended at the same time. She made a decision that would change everything. Like if you want to know what happened next. Sueli had been working at the Valentino mansion for exactly 2 weeks, and in that time, she'd learned 3 critical rules. Never look Dominic Valentino directly in the eyes, never ask questions about the men in dark suits who came and went at odd hours, and absolutely never, under any circumstances, enter the 3rd floor where his 6-month-old son Marco's nursery was located. She was about to break all 3 rules. The mansion was a fortress of marble and mahogany, perched on the edge of Lake Michigan like a crown jewel. Sueli cleaned it from sunrise to sunset, her dark hands scrubbing floors that cost more than her entire childhood home in the South Side. She was invisible here, just another pair of working hands, and that's exactly how she preferred it. Invisibility meant safety. Invisibility meant she could send money back to her mother, could pay off the medical bills from her daughter's final days, could survive. But tonight, invisibility felt like cowardice. "Please," she whispered to the empty hallway, Marco's cries piercing through the walls. "Someone help him." The baby had been crying for 6 hours straight. 6 hours of soul-wrenching, desperate wails that made Sueli's breasts ache and leak into the compression bra she wore to suppress the milk her body still insisted on producing. She'd tried to focus on dusting the library, on organizing the kitchen, on anything that would distract her from the maternal instinct screaming inside her skull. She'd heard the fragments of conversation between Dominic Valentino and his security team. The baby was allergic to formula. Every brand they'd tried resulted in terrible rashes, digestive problems, constant pain. The pediatrician had recommended a specialized hypoallergenic formula from Europe, but even overnight shipping would take too long. Marco needed relief now. The previous nanny had tried everything. Bottles at different temperatures, different positions, white noise machines, swaddling techniques from 3 different parenting books. Nothing worked. The baby was starving and suffering, and his father's money and power couldn't fix it. Sueli found herself climbing the grand staircase, her worn sneakers silent on the plush carpet. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She could be fired for this. Worse, she could disappear. Everyone in Chicago knew what happened to people who crossed Dominic Valentino. But Marco's cries were the same pitch, the same desperate frequency as her daughter Destiny's had been when she was hungry. Sueli's body recognized it on a cellular level, responding with a flood of milk that soaked through her bra and made her button-up shirt damp. She reached the 3rd floor. The hallway stretched before her, walls lined with tasteful artwork and soft lighting that did nothing to muffle the baby's agony. 2 bodyguards stood outside the nursery door looking exhausted and helpless. "Mr. Valentino said no one goes in," one of them said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "That baby is suffering," Sueli said quietly, meeting his eyes for the first time since she'd started working here. "I can help him." The bodyguards exchanged glances. After a moment, one of them stepped aside. The nursery was a palace for a prince, hand-painted murals of Italian countryside, a custom-made crib that probably cost more than a car, every imaginable toy and comfort. But none of it mattered to Marco, who lay in his father's arms, his tiny body rigid with discomfort, his face contorted in misery. Dominic Valentino looked up as Sueli entered, and she nearly stepped back from the intensity in his dark eyes. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, with sharp features, and a powerful build barely contained by his rolled-up dress shirt. Tattoos snaked up his forearms, dark ink that spoke of violence and legacy. His jaw was tight, his usual commanding presence reduced to helpless desperation as he tried and failed to soothe his son. "I didn't call for anyone," he said, his voice rough from hours of stress. "I know, sir. But Swelly's voice caught. "I think I can help him. The pediatrician just left. There's nothing—" "Mr. Valentino," Swelly interrupted, something she'd never dared do before. "I lost my daughter 3 months ago. She was 4 months old. I'm still producing milk. If Marco is hungry and can't tolerate formula, I could—" The words died in her throat as Dominic's expression shifted from exhaustion to shock to something she couldn't quite read. The room fell absolutely silent, except for Marco's whimpers, which had quieted slightly at the sound of a new voice. "You're suggesting you nurse my son," Dominic said slowly, each word carefully measured. Swelly's hands twisted in front of her. "Only if you give permission, sir. Only if it might help him. I can't listen to him suffer anymore. No baby should feel that kind of pain." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications and broken rules. Swelly could feel her career, possibly her life, hanging in the balance. But when she looked at Marco's red, tear-streaked face, she knew she'd make the same offer again. Dominic Valentino studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face as if trying to read her soul. Then, slowly, he stood and walked toward her. Swelly's breath caught. He was taller than she'd realized, his presence overwhelming in the soft-lit nursery. "What's your name?" he asked. "Swelly Carter, sir." "How long have you been working here, Swelly?" 2 weeks, sir. And in 2 weeks you've never tried to speak to me, never asked for anything, never even looked at me directly." His voice was quiet, thoughtful. "But you'll risk everything to help my son." "He's a baby," Swelly said simply. "He's in pain. The rest doesn't matter." Something shifted in Dominic's expression. He looked down at Marco, then back at Swelly. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "If you're willing to do this, I would be grateful." He placed Marco in Swelly's arms, and the baby's weight settled against her chest like coming home. Her body recognized this, remembered this. Marco turned his face toward her instinctively, rooting, searching. "I'll leave you to it," Dominic said, but he didn't move toward the door. "Unless you prefer privacy, you can stay," Swelly said, already lifting her shirt with trembling fingers. "He's your son. You should be here. Comment what you think will happen next." Marco latched on immediately, his small body relaxing for the first time in hours. The relief was instantaneous and visible, his tiny fists unclenched, his breathing evened out, the tension in his miniature frame melting away. Swelly felt tears slip down her cheeks as she looked down at him. This beautiful child who wasn't hers, but needed her in this moment. She'd forgotten how it felt. The pull and release, the primal satisfaction of providing exactly what was needed. Her body had been holding on to this milk, preparing for a baby who would never come back. And now it had purpose again. The ache in her breasts eased as Marco nursed, his eyes drifting closed in contentment. Swelly looked up to find Dominic Valentino staring at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Not anger, not disgust, but something raw and unguarded. Vulnerability, she realized. She was seeing him completely unmasked. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking on the words. "I didn't know, I couldn't." He ran a hand through his dark hair and Swelly noticed it was shaking. "He's been in pain for so long. The doctors, the specialists, the formulas, nothing worked. I thought I was going to lose him." "You're not going to lose him," Swelly said with quiet certainty. "He's strong. He just needed the right help." Dominic pulled a chair closer and sat down, close enough that Swelly could smell his cologne, something expensive and woodsy. He watched his son nurse with an expression of wonder, as if witnessing a miracle. "Tell me about your daughter," he said softly. Swelly's breath hitched. No one had asked her that. Not her mother, not her friends, not the grief counselor the hospital had recommended. Everyone avoided the topic, dancing around her loss like it was contagious. Her name was Destiny, Sweley began, her voice steady despite the tears. She had the biggest brown eyes and the softest curls. She loved when I sang to her, old gospel songs my grandmother taught me. She paused, adjusting Marco's position slightly. She was born with a heart defect. We knew from the beginning it was serious. But I hoped, her voice broke. You don't have to, Dominic started, but Sweley shook her head. I want to. No one lets me talk about her anymore. They think it's too painful, that I need to move on. She looked down at Marco. But she was my whole world for 4 months. Moving on feels like forgetting, and I can't forget her. You shouldn't have to, Dominic said firmly. Grief isn't something you move past. It's something you carry with you. My wife, Marco's mother, she died in childbirth 6 months ago. I understand that weight. Sweley's eyes widened. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. It's not common knowledge. The family keeps certain things private. He reached out and gently touched Marco's tiny hand. She gave me him. Her last gift. And I've been terrified every single day that I'll fail him, that I won't be enough. You're here, Sweley said. You're trying. That's what matters. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound Marco's satisfied nursing. Sweley felt something shift in the room, a connection forming that transcended employer and employee, that went beyond the circumstances that brought them together. They were two people who'd lost too much, who carried grief like a second skin, finding unexpected solace in helping a tiny life thrive. When Marco finally pulled away, milk-drunk and peaceful, Dominic stood and took him gently from Sweley's arms. He held his son against his chest, and Sweley could see the tattoos on his forearms more clearly now. Names and dates, a family tree written in ink and memory. How much do I pay you? Dominic asked suddenly. Sweley blinked at the change in topic. $15 an hour, sir. That's insulting. He looked at her directly, and Sweley felt the full force of his presence. Starting tomorrow, you're Marco's nurse. $50 an hour, full benefits, and you'll live in the guest house on the property. You'll have your own space, but you'll be close enough to help him when he needs you. Mr. Valentino, Dominic, he corrected. If you're going to help raise my son, you should use my name. That's too much, Sweley protested, even as her heart raced at the thought of that kind of money. I'm just helping. You're saving his life, Dominic said simply. That's worth more than I could ever pay you, but I'm going to try. He walked to the door, Marco sleeping peacefully against his shoulder. Before leaving, he turned back to Sweley. There are rules in my world, codes we live by. One of them is loyalty. You showed loyalty tonight to someone who couldn't ask for it, couldn't repay it. That's rare. That's valuable. His dark eyes held hers. You'll be under my protection now. No one will touch you, no one will harm you, you're part of this family. After he left, Sweley sat alone in the nursery, her shirt still damp with milk, her mind reeling. She'd come upstairs to help a suffering baby. She was leaving with a new life, a new purpose, and the unsettling realization that Dominic Valentino wasn't just a mob boss to her anymore. He was a grieving father who'd just trusted her with his most precious gift, subscribed to see how their connection deepens. The guest house was bigger than any place Sweley had ever lived. 1 bedroom, a full kitchen, a bathroom with a tub instead of just a shower, and windows that looked out over the manicured gardens. She'd moved in the next day with the single suitcase that contained everything she owned, feeling like she'd stepped into someone else's life. But it was the routine that followed that truly changed everything. Every 3 hours, day and night, Sweley went to the main house to nurse Marco. Dominic was almost always there, whether it was 3 p.m. or 3 a.m. He'd greet her at the door himself, ignoring the confused looks from his security team, and lead her to whichever room Marco was in. Sometimes it was the nursery, sometimes Dominic's office, once even the kitchen at 2 in the morning, when Marco had woken up especially fussy. Dominic never left during feedings. He stayed, watched, and gradually they began to talk. Sweley learned that he'd inherited his position at 25 when his father was killed, that he hated violence but was good at it, that he'd wanted to be an architect before life decided otherwise, that he played piano when he couldn't sleep, old Italian songs his mother had taught him. Dominic learned that Sweley had a degree in early childhood education, but couldn't afford to use it, because teaching jobs didn't pay enough to cover her mother's medical expenses, that she'd sung in church choirs her whole life, that she was terrified of thunderstorms but wouldn't admit it to anyone, that she'd never left Chicago, had never seen the ocean, had never flown in a plane. "Why education?" Dominic asked one night as Sueli burped Marco after a feeding. It was late, past midnight, and the mansion was quiet around them. "Because children deserve advocates," Sueli said simply, "especially children from neighborhoods like mine. Kids who are brilliant and creative, but never get the chance to show it because the schools are underfunded, the teachers are overworked, and everyone's already decided they won't amount to anything. You sound angry? I am angry." Sueli met his eyes. "I'm angry that my daughter died because we had to choose between rent and better health insurance. I'm angry that I have a degree I can't use. I'm angry that—" She stopped, shaking her head. "Sorry, you don't need to hear this." "I want to hear it," Dominic said intently. "You're always so calm, so composed. I want to know what's underneath." "Rage," Sueli admitted. "Grief and rage and exhaustion. I'm tired of the world being divided into people who have everything and people who have nothing. I'm tired of watching good people work 3 jobs and still not make it. I'm tired of—" She stopped as her voice broke. Dominic reached out and gently took Marco from her arms, placing him in his crib. Then he did something that shocked her. He pulled her into a hug. Sueli stiffened, uncertain. No one touched her anymore. After Destiny died, even her friends had kept their distance, as if grief were contagious. But Dominic's arms were solid and warm, and after a moment she let herself lean into him. "You're allowed to be angry," he said quietly, his voice rumbling in his chest. "You're allowed to be exhausted. You don't have to be strong all the time." Sueli's tears came then, hot and overwhelming. She cried for Destiny, for the life she'd lost, for the unfairness of everything. And Dominic held her through it, one hand gently rubbing her back, not saying anything, just being present. When she finally pulled away, embarrassed, Dominic handed her a tissue and a glass of water that appeared from nowhere. "Better?" he asked. "I just fell apart in front of my employer," Sueli said, wiping her eyes. "Professional, Sueli, really professional." "You fell apart in front of a friend," Dominic corrected, "and friends take care of each other." Friends. The word settled between them, strange and new. Sueli looked up at him, really looked, and saw past the mob boss persona to the man underneath. A man who woke up at 2 a.m. when his son needed feeding, who remembered that she liked tea instead of coffee, who was trying so hard to be both mother and father to a baby who would never know the woman who died to give him life. "Thank you," Sueli said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me. Not just as help, but as a person." Dominic smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Hard not to see you, Sueli. You're pretty unforgettable." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was ready to name. Then Marco made a small sound in his sleep, and the spell broke. Dominic cleared his throat, stepping back. "It's late. You should get some rest." "Yeah," Sueli agreed, but neither of them moved. Finally, Dominic walked her to the door. As she was leaving, he called her name. She turned back. "Tomorrow is Sunday," he said. "My one day off. Would you and Marco like to spend it with me? Maybe go to the gardens in Lincoln Park? I hear they're beautiful this time of year." Sueli's heart skipped. "That sounds nice. It's a date then." He paused. "Not a date, just a—" "I know what you meant," Sueli said, smiling despite herself. "I'll see you tomorrow, Dominic." She walked back to the guest house in the dark, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Behind her, in the mansion, Dominic Valentino stood at the window and watched until she was safely inside, a small smile playing at his lips. Neither of them was ready to admit what was growing between them, but they both felt it, fragile and precious and terrifying. A connection built on shared grief, mutual respect, and the tiny life they both loved. Share this with someone who believes in second chances. 3 weeks into Sueli's new position, everything fell apart. It started with the black SUVs that pulled up outside the mansion at dawn. Sueli was already in the nursery with Marco, having just finished his early morning feeding, when she heard shouting downstairs. Male voices, angry and threatening, then gunshots. Her blood turned to ice. She grabbed Marco from his changing table, pressing him against her chest as she backed into the corner farthest from the door. Her hand shook as she pulled out her phone to call 911, but before she could dial, the nursery door burst open. It wasn't Dominic. It was a man she'd never seen before, tall and heavy-set with cold eyes. Behind him stood 2 more men, all armed. "That the kid?" the first man asked. "That's him," another confirmed. "Boss wants both of them." Sueli's arms tightened around Marco. "You're not taking him," the man laughed. "Lady, you got no say in this. Carmine Rossi sends his regards to Dominic Valentino, tells him he should have taken the deal." A rival family. Sueli's mind raced through everything she'd overheard in the past weeks, fragments of phone conversations and tense meetings. Dominic had been refusing a merger, saying he wouldn't partner with someone who dealt in human trafficking. And now they were retaliating by taking his son. "Please," Sueli said, hating how her voice shook. "He's just a baby. He hasn't done anything." "Neither did the 15 girls Rossi wanted to move through Valentino's ports," the man said coldly. "But your boss decided to play hero. Now we're playing hardball." He moved toward her, and Sueli did something she never imagined she'd do. She ran, not toward the door where the other men stood, but toward the window. The nursery was on the 3rd floor, but there was a balcony, and if she could just... A hand grabbed her arm, spinning her around. Marco screamed, feeling her terror. "You got nowhere to go, sweetheart. Make this easy on yourself and the kid." Then the door slammed open with enough force to crack the frame, and Dominic Valentino entered like an avenging angel. He had a gun in each hand, his white shirt spattered with blood that Sueli desperately hoped wasn't his. His dark eyes found Sueli first, scanning her and Marco for injuries, then shifted to the men in the room with an expression that promised death. "Step away from them," Dominic said, his voice deadly calm. "Now." 3 against 1, Valentino," the leader said, trying to sound confident. "Even you can't—" Dominic shot him in the knee before he finished the sentence. The man went down screaming. The other 2 raised their weapons, but Dominic was faster, more precise. 2 shots, both perfect headshots. The men dropped. Sueli pressed Marco's face against her shoulder, trying to shield him from the violence, even as her whole body trembled. Dominic crossed the room in 3 strides, his hands gentle despite the violence they'd just enacted as he checked them both over. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "Did they touch you?" "We're fine," Sueli managed, though tears were streaming down her face. "Dominic, they said, Rossi." "I know." Dominic's jaw was tight. "Marco!" he shouted toward the hallway. His second-in-command appeared immediately. "Get Sueli and Marco to the safe room, now. Full lockdown protocol." "Boss, you need medical—" "I said now!" Dominic's voice brooked no argument. He looked at Sueli, and his expression softened fractionally. "Go with Marco, you'll be safe there, I promise." "But you're bleeding," Sueli started. "I've had worse." He touched her cheek gently, his thumb brushing away her tears. "Keep him safe, Sueli. That's all I need you to do." Marco led them through a hidden door in the nursery that Sueli had never noticed, down a narrow staircase to a reinforced room in the basement. It looked like something from a spy movie. Thick walls, surveillance screens, supplies for days. Marco showed her how to lock it from inside, gave her a weapon she had no idea how to use, and told her Dominic would come personally when it was safe. Then she was alone with Marco in the silence, her heart hammering, her mind replaying those terrible moments upstairs, the blood, the gunshots, the casual way those men had discussed taking a baby as leverage. Marco was crying, sensing her fear. Sueli sat in the corner and automatically began to nurse him, the familiar action grounding her even as her mind spun. This was Dominic's world. This was what she'd signed up for, even if she hadn't fully understood it before. People wanted to hurt him, wanted to hurt his son, wanted to hurt anyone who stood in their way, and she'd just put herself directly in the crossfire. Hours passed. Sueli nursed Marco, changed him, sang to him, tried to keep him calm while her own fear ate at her insides. She checked the surveillance screens obsessively, But they only showed empty hallways. No sound, no information, just waiting. When the lock finally clicked open, Sueli grabbed the gun Marco had given her, her hands shaking as she pointed it at the door. If those men had won, if they'd gotten past Dominic— "It's me," Dominic's voice called. "Sueli, it's me, I'm alone." She lowered the gun as he entered, and nearly dropped it when she saw him fully. He was covered in blood now, his shirt torn, a makeshift bandage around his left arm. But he was alive. He was here. "Is it over?" Sueli whispered. "It's over." Dominic sank down beside her, his usual powerful presence diminished by exhaustion and pain. "Rossi won't be a problem anymore. Neither will anyone else who thinks they can use my family to get to me." "You're hurt." "I've had worse," he repeated, but winced when she gently touched his bandaged arm. "Okay, maybe not much worse." Sueli handed Marco to him, then stood. "Stay there. I need to look at this properly." She found a first aid kit in the safe room supplies and returned to find Dominic holding his son with infinite gentleness, whispering Italian words Sueli didn't understand. She knelt beside them and carefully unwrapped the bandage. The bullet had grazed him, not deep but bleeding steadily. "This needs stitches," Sueli said. "I'll have the doctor come." "I can do it." At his surprised look, she added, "My mom was a nurse before she got sick. She taught me, hold still." She worked carefully, her earlier terror transforming into focus. This was something she could do, something useful. Dominic watched her face as she stitched, and when she'd finished and was wrapping a clean bandage, he caught her hand. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for protecting him, for not running when you had the chance." "I would never leave him," Sueli said simply. "He needs me." "I need you too," Dominic admitted, the words raw and honest. "Not just for Marco. I need—" He stopped, shaking his head. "This isn't the time." "When is the time?" Sueli challenged. "After more men come. After more violence." "Dominic, I just watched you kill 3 people. I'm sitting in a panic room with your blood on my hands. If not now, when?" He looked at her for a long moment, then set Marco gently in the portable crib beside them. When he turned back to Sueli, his dark eyes were intense, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. "I'm falling for you," he said simply. "I don't know when it happened, maybe the first night when you risked everything for my son. Maybe later when you told me about destiny. Maybe just now when you faced down armed men rather than leave Marco. But it's happened, and I can't ignore it anymore." Sueli's breath caught. "Dominic, I know all the reasons it's wrong. The danger, the difference in our worlds, the fact that you work for me, I know." He reached out and cupped her face gently. "But I also know that when I thought I might lose you today, when I saw those men in the nursery with you, I've never felt terror like that. Not even when I thought I'd lose Marco." "I'm falling for you too," Sueli whispered. "I've been trying not to. Trying to keep it professional, to remember my place, but you make it impossible, Dominic. You're not what I expected. You're not just the dangerous mob boss everyone fears. You're a father, a man trying to do right by his son, someone who sees me as more than just—" He kissed her then, soft and careful, asking rather than demanding. Sueli leaned into it, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders as the world narrowed to just this moment. This connection, this impossible, dangerous, perfect thing growing between them. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. "I can't promise you safety," he said. "I can't promise you normal, but I can promise you protection, loyalty, and everything I have to give." "That's enough," Sueli said. "That's more than enough." Marco made a small sound, and they both looked at him, sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the violence and confessions and shifting world around him. And Sueli realized that somewhere along the way, this had become her family. Not by blood, not by traditional means, but by choice and circumstance and love. Comment: if you think they can make it work. The aftermath of the attack changed everything and nothing. The mansion went into lockdown for 2 days, while Dominic's security team swept every inch, upgraded every system, tripled the guards. Sueli moved from the guest house into a suite on the 2nd floor, directly below Marco's nursery, close enough to hear if he needed her. Close enough to Dominic's room that late-night visits became common. They didn't hide what was growing between them, but they were careful. Dominic's world was watching, waiting to see if this connection was real or if Sueli was just another temporary fixture. But as weeks turned into months, as Marco grew stronger and healthier, as Sueli became indispensable, not just to the baby but to Dominic himself, even the most skeptical members of Dominic's organization had to accept it. Sueli Carter wasn't going anywhere. "Tell me again why we're doing this," Sueli said, checking her reflection in the mirror. She wore a black dress Dominic had bought her, elegant and simple, paired with small diamond earrings that had belonged to his mother. Her natural curls were styled in an updo, and she looked, she had to admit, beautiful. "Because it's time," Dominic said from the doorway, looking devastating in a tailored black suit. "Time for them to meet the woman who saved my son, the woman I love." 3 months had passed since the attack. 3 months of learning to navigate Dominic's world, of understanding the codes and rules and unspoken hierarchies. 3 months of falling deeper in love with a man who was equal parts dangerous and devoted, ruthless and tender. Tonight was the first major family gathering since Marco's mother had died, and Dominic was introducing Sueli as his partner. Not his employee, not just Marco's nurse. His partner. "Your aunts are going to hate me," Sueli predicted. "My aunts hate everyone," Dominic said with a small smile, "except Marco. And maybe you, once they see how happy you make me." He crossed the room and pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready. We can wait." "No," Sueli said firmly. "I'm ready. I want to be part of this, all of it. Your family, your world, your life. I'm not hiding anymore." The gathering was at Dominic's uncle's estate, a massive property in Winnetka that made the Valentino mansion look modest. Sueli carried Marco, who was now 9 months old and thriving, his cheeks full and his eyes bright. He'd grown attached to Sueli in a way that went beyond nursing. She was his constant, his comfort, the person he reached for when he was tired or scared. The Valentino family was vast and intimidating, uncles and aunts, cousins and associates, all dressed in designer clothes and watching Sueli with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. She was an outsider, a black woman from the South Side dating the most powerful man in Chicago. The whispers followed her through the rooms, but Dominic never left her side. His hand stayed at the small of her back, steady and sure. When his uncle Salvatore made a pointed comment about appropriate partnerships, Dominic's response was ice-cold and immediate. "Sueli is family. Anyone who disrespects her, disrespects me." The room fell silent. Then Uncle Salvatore, a man who'd been in the business for 50 years, smiled slowly and raised his glass. "To family," he said, and the others echoed him, some reluctantly, some genuinely. It was Dominic's youngest cousin, a woman named Gianna, who finally broke through Sueli's careful walls. "That dress is gorgeous," she said, appearing at Sueli's elbow with a glass of wine. "And I heard what you did, protecting Marco during the Rossi situation. That took serious guts." "I didn't really think," Sueli admitted. "I just reacted." "That's the best kind of courage." Gianna smiled warmly. "For what it's worth, I think you're exactly what Dominic needs, and that baby definitely loves you. Look at him." Marco had fallen asleep against Sueli's chest, his small hand fisted in her dress, completely at peace. Sueli looked down at him and felt her heart swell. "I love him too," she said softly. "More than I thought possible." "And Dominic?" Sueli looked across the room to where Dominic stood talking with his uncle, his dark eyes finding hers even in conversation. "Him too," she admitted. "Definitely him too." Later that night, after they'd returned to the mansion and put Marco to bed, Dominic found Sueli on the balcony overlooking the lake. The Chicago skyline glittered in the distance, beautiful and vast. "You survived your first Valentino family gathering," Dominic said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "How do you feel?" "Exhausted," Sueli admitted, leaning back against his chest. "But good. Like I belong, maybe." "You do belong." Dominic turned her to face him, his expression serious. "Sueli, I need to tell you something, ask you something." Her heart skipped. Okay. When I met you, I was drowning. Marco was sick. I was failing as a father. I couldn't see a way forward. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You saved us both. You gave Marco health and me hope. You showed me that I could be more than what this life made me. That I could be a good father, a good man, because you see the good in me even when I don't see it myself. Dominic, let me finish. He pulled a small box from his pocket and Sueli's breath stopped. I know this is fast. I know we come from different worlds. I know there are 1,000 reasons you should say no, but I also know that I want to spend every day for the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up next to you and fall asleep holding you. I want to raise Marco together, and maybe, if you want, give him siblings. I want to show you the ocean and teach you Italian, and take you to all the places you've never been. He opened the box, revealing a ring that caught the moonlight, a deep red ruby surrounded by diamonds. This was my grandmother's. She was the strongest woman I ever knew until I met you. She would have loved you. Tears streamed down Sueli's face. You're sure? About me, about this? I've never been more sure of anything. Dominic's voice was steady, certain. Sueli Carter, will you marry me? Will you be my partner, my wife, Marco's mother, in every way that matters? Yes, Sueli breathed. Yes, absolutely yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, then kissed her, deep and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both smiling through tears, Sueli looked at the ring on her hand and felt the weight of it, not just the metal and stones, but what it represented. A new life, a new family, a future she'd never imagined but now couldn't imagine living without. I love you, she said, even though you're impossible and dangerous and completely changed my life. I love you too, Dominic replied, even though you're stubborn and brave and completely ruined me for anyone else. They stood there on the balcony, holding each other as the city lights sparkled below, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something real from grief and danger and love. Inside the mansion, Marco slept peacefully, dreaming whatever babies dream, safe and loved and cared for by two people who would protect him with everything they had. And Sueli, who'd lost so much, who'd thought her heart was too broken to love again, realized that sometimes endings lead to new beginnings, that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the one you're born into, that sometimes in the darkest moments you find the light, like if you believe in love conquering all. The nursery was different now, painted soft yellow instead of blue, with 2 cribs instead of 1. Marco, now almost 2 years old, played in the corner with his building blocks, chattering to himself in a mix of English and Italian. In the first crib, his baby sister Isabella slept peacefully, her tiny fist curled near her face. Sueli sat in the rocking chair, nursing her new daughter, feeling the familiar pull and contentment. This time was different from nursing Marco. Isabella was hers by blood and by birth, the daughter she thought she'd never have after losing destiny. But Marco was just as much hers, just as much her son, even without biology to bind them. Dominic entered quietly, having learned long ago how to move silently when babies were sleeping. He kissed Sueli's head, then Isabella's, then crossed to Marco and scooped him up, making the toddler giggle. "Mama," Marco said, reaching for Sueli even in his father's arms. He called her that now, had been calling her that for months. The first time it happened, Sueli had cried for an hour, overwhelmed by the gift of being someone's mama again. "I'm here, baby," Sueli said softly. "Give Mama a few minutes with your sister, then it's your turn for snuggles." They'd gotten married 6 months ago in a small ceremony by the lake, with Marco as the ring bearer, and Sueli 8 months pregnant with Isabella. It had been perfect, intimate and real, focused on them and their chosen family, rather than the elaborate society wedding Dominic's aunts had pushed for. Now, looking around at her life, at the husband she adored, at the son she'd bonded with through circumstance and love, at the daughter she'd carried and birthed, Sueli felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "What are you thinking?" Dominic asked, settling Marco on his lap while the toddler played with his father's watch. "That I never expected this," Sueli admitted. "A year and a half ago, I was cleaning houses and crying myself to sleep every night. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. And now," she gestured around at the nursery, at their children, at him. "Now I have everything I never knew I needed. You saved us first. Dominic reminded her. Marco and me both. We were drowning before you. We saved each other, Sueli corrected. That's how the best love stories work. Isabella finished nursing, and Sueli lifted her to her shoulder, gently patting her back. Dominic stood and brought Marco over, and they stood together as a family, Marco between them, Isabella in Sueli's arms, Dominic's arm around all of them. Family photo, Marco announced, having learned the phrase from the constant pictures Dominic's aunts took. That's right, baby, Sueli agreed. Family photo. She caught her reflection in the window, a black woman in comfortable clothes, her natural hair in twists, holding a baby who had her eyes and nose, standing next to a reformed mob boss and a toddler who called her mama. A family that looked nothing like the traditional stories, but was perfect in all the ways that mattered. Outside, Chicago spread out below them, the city that had broken her and rebuilt her, that had taken everything and given her more than she'd lost. And Sueli realized that sometimes the most unlikely stories were the best ones. Sometimes the darkest nights led to the brightest mornings. Sometimes, when you thought you were just surviving, you were actually finding your way home. I love you, Dominic whispered against her hair. All of you. Forever. Forever, Sueli echoed, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Marco reached up and patted both their faces. Love you, he repeated carefully, and Isabella made a small sound of contentment. And in that moment, in that nursery filled with love and light and the promise of tomorrow, Sueli Carter Valentino knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Share this story with someone who needs hope.